all been about IUL. And there was this video that came across my desk. I actually am going to be watching it for the very first time. So it could be a clickbait trap, or it could be something super genuine. We're going to be watching it for the first time. Part of the Better Wealth React series is for you to just get more into my head. And we can learn a lot by just experience things together. And so without further ado, let's jump into I was wrong about whole life insurance.
Well, I feel like it's finally time for me to correct the record on whole life insurance because maybe I've been wrong all this time. Oh, that's real good. Hey, it's Matthew Decker of Leverage Wealth Management, and I also run Cash Value Life Insurance Reviews here on YouTube. Now, I talk a lot about index universal life insurance. I talk a lot about whole life insurance. I talk a lot about current assumption, VUL, pretty much anything that relates to fixed products in the financial planning world. So that's life insurance, that's annuities. Those would be the two major things that we spend a lot of time talking about here on YouTube. And if you've watched many of my videos, you've probably come away with this feeling, this sinking feeling that I hate whole life insurance. And I could see why you might think that, because I've been pretty hard on whole life insurance in the past. And some things happened to me over the last couple of weeks that have me rethinking my stance. And I might even go as far as saying I've been wrong all along. So we'll get to that in a second.
I'll say this: it's just starting off very impressive. It's rare for people to, on a public channel, especially for people that have clients and all these people watching, to set the stage like that. My respect for people that are able to say, hey, this is what I've come across. This is where some of my biases, and now I'm shifting, or I can say that I was quote unquote wrong. I have a ton of respect for. Again, I don't know what the end result is going to be. It could be, we could all be set up, but overall, tons of respect for you. And yeah, let's continue.
Before we kind of get to where maybe I was wrong, I want to first just kind of recap the things that I have been saying about whole life insurance, because there's still a lot of good information in there. And I'd like to just kind of refresh our understanding on whole life insurance. It's not going to be super in depth because a lot of the things I've said still hold value. And so we'll link the whole life insurance videos up here on top. That way, if you want to kind of go investigate yourself, you can do that. But let's get right to it. So let's talk about some notes on whole life insurance. So the first thing to know about whole life insurance is that it's going to be guaranteed. Now, when we say that whole life insurance is guaranteed, it's really guaranteed in a couple ways. So whole life insurance is going to have a guaranteed death benefit. So as long as you pay the premium that you're supposed to pay, the death benefit is going to be there. It's guaranteed death benefit. They're also going to have a guaranteed premium. Now, what that means is if you start with a $500,000 death benefit policy, they're going to tell you what premium you have to pay. And that premium is never going to go up as long as you pay that stated premium, the premium being guaranteed. The death benefit is guaranteed. So you have a guaranteed death benefit. You have a guaranteed premium. The last thing that you're going to have in pretty much every whole life insurance policy, in fact, I think every whole life insurance policy is going to have these three guarantees. You're going to have a cash value guarantee. And what that means is if you pay the premium that you're supposed to pay for the death benefit that you purchase, you are guaranteed to have a certain amount of cash value in that policy, no matter what happens. Okay, so that's basically how whole life insurance is built. You have a premium guarantee, you have a death benefit guarantee, you have a cash guarantee.
And this is what I'll say. One of the common arguments and that comes up in a whole life versus IUL debate is, what's your definition of permanent? And if your definition of permanent means that your policy will last, like guaranteed based on certain premium guidelines, then whole life is technically the only permanent contract, because IUL has benefits and the goal is for it to last your entire life. But even the people that promote sell IUL will say that they're technically, you can't technically RPU an IUL. You can, but there potentially could be a premium requirements, and so to keep it from lapsing. And so that's one of those things when it comes to the guarantees at its most fundamental foundational bedrock. Whole life is built on guarantees. And a lot of times people downplay it to be like, oh, boring old life insurance. for me, we use it as an savings alternative. It's like if I was saving and using my money throughout my life, I want my money to be in a place that's not there's not a ton of levers.
Now, with all these guarantees, just something that you need to know, every time an insurance company adds a guarantee to one of their contracts, what that should mean to you is it's going to be more expensive, because the way these products work, it's not like your bank. You put money into your bank, the bank doesn't hold that cash, they loan that cash out. There's no guarantee on your money over, the FDIC guarantee. Okay, so that's the only guarantee you're getting from a bank. In life insurance, it's quite a bit different. If you give a life insurance company money and they have guarantees in their contract, they have to hold cash in order to back those guarantees. And if the life insurance company has to hold cash to back guarantees, it means they can't invest that cash, at least not in risky vehicles, right? They have to be able to show that that money is going to be there to back the guarantees, which means they can't invest in high risk vehicles because there's no guarantee in some of those high risk vehicles. So every guarantee that a life insurance company or an annuity company adds to a product is going to increase the fees. It's just how it works. Now, if you were to compare that to the vehicle that we talk about most on this channel, which is indexed universal life, it's going to look quite a bit different because universal life doesn't have near the guarantees that whole life insurance has. So what do we mean by that? Well, in index life, we'll just call it IUL, what's guaranteed? Well, if we take this cash value guarantee, the only part of the cash value that's guaranteed in an index universal life insurance policy is they guarantee that you have a 0% floor. So that means your money's not going to go backwards because the market is down. Now, you still have to pay fees, but that's not what this is saying. What this is saying is if the stock market or the S&P is down 10%, you're not going to realize that 10% loss. You're just going to get a zero. So that's the guarantee in indexed life. There's not a growth guarantee in most policies. Now, some policies will have a 0.2% or a 1% or a 2% guaranteed floor. But by and large, let's just say that an index universal life insurance policy, it's not going to have the same type of cash value guarantee that a whole life insurance policy would have. What they're guaranteeing you is that 0% floor. In terms of the premium, there's not really a premium guarantee because they give you flexibility with your premium to pay more or pay less. And so an index universal life policy is not going to have a premium guarantee if it's built for cash growth.
And the flexibility, as you can imagine, can be a major upside and downside. When you create flexibility for certain people, they can massively underfund it. And that's why index universal life gets a bad rap, because some people are their policies are blowing up. And it's not all the agent's fault. It's because it wasn't funded properly because the contract itself allowed flexibility, but the flexibility ultimately created more problems because of the lack of guarantees.
We'll put a little asterisk there for now because we'll come back to it. Same with the death benefit. The death benefit is going to be guaranteed for some certain amount of years, but it's not going to be guaranteed for life. Why isn't it going to be guaranteed for life? Well, they can't guarantee it for life because they're giving you flexible premium. And so if you decide not to pay premium, they can't, they're not going to give you the guarantee if they're also going to give you premium flexibility. Now, there's an asterisk, I said. So let's talk about that. There are some IULs that will give you the option to add riders that will provide a death benefit guarantee. And with that death benefit guarantee, it comes with a premium guarantee, meaning if you pay this premium, this death benefit will be guaranteed. But something to know, typically those are not put on cash building products. So there is an IUL that is a death benefit focused product. Okay, so if you want guaranteed death benefit and you want it on a policy that has the opportunity to grow cash, those index life policies do exist. And there's a place for them, but certainly most people in the index life space, they're looking for maximum cash.
Yeah. Guaranteed universal life is a flavor of a universal life chassis that essentially, if all you care about is a permanent death benefit, you can lock that in. And as long as you pay on time, it will be one of the most efficient ways to pass on money. But you don't get any really cash value. It's just a death benefit play. Again, what he's talking about and what we talk about is using life insurance as a place to maximize cash. Now, I talk about it more from a savings safe aspect, and I imagine that he's talked about IUL in all kinds of aspects, maybe even including it like an investment. But again, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, and he's doing a great job so far.
And if you're looking for maximum cash, what you would want to eliminate would be all the things that are going to increase the fees. That pretty much goes without saying. I don't think that that's too controversial. All right, so let's talk about crediting on whole life insurance policies. We talked about the fees. Let's talk about how you earn interest. And so when it comes to how you earn interest on these whole life insurance policies, it's really pretty simple. Now, we'll set aside any maybe unique products that have some kind of niche market, and we'll just focus on the bulk of the products that all function the same way. And that is, you're going to get some kind of dividend from these whole life insurance policies. Now, the word dividend is being used differently in whole life than it would be used in a traditional investment. What I mean by that is they might quote you something like a 5 or a 6 or a 7% dividend. When you think of a dividend being stated at 7%, you're thinking, I'm going to earn 7%. I'm going to get 7% back based on my investment. That's not how it actually works in whole life insurance. They do have a stated dividend, but there's two sides to this equation, and we'll write it out. So the equation for whole life, so we'll just say whole life growth is going to equal the dividend rate times the cash value minus the fee. Now, this seems pretty simple, but when you are quoted a 7% dividend rate on a whole life insurance policy, they're only giving you the one variable, which is the dividend rate. So you might have a 7% dividend rate, but that 7% is not being applied to the whole cash value because first they're taking out fees and they don't tell you what the fees are. Let me say that again. They don't tell you what the fees are. And if you think I'm crazy, look at any whole life insurance illustration and look for the ledger that shows you the line items on their fees. It doesn't exist. You won't get a fee breakdown on a whole life insurance policy. So when you hear, well, why would you buy anything other than a whole life insurance policy? Because you can get some kind of 7% dividend. Well, you're not getting a 7% dividend. You're getting 7% on some phantom number that is not disclosed to you. And when it actually shakes out, it's really more like a 4 to 4.5. Maybe you get up into the 5% internal rate of return, and we would be talking, 30 years, 20 to 30 years down the road.
Yep. So love all the talking points. This is the biggest pet peeve I have in the whole life space. A lot of people in infinite banking will say you'll get arbitrage on your policy and you're making 6 or 7% because of the dividend, and you're only getting your loan is lower. And it's like, all that's wrong. The way to really reverse engineer a policy and figure out the fees. And again, he's right. They don't say like this is mortality and this is the fee for this and this and this. But the way to reverse engineer that is an IRR calculation. So what we'll do is each and every year we'll run different internal rate of return calculations on the same person essentially. And so you'll be able to compare like, okay, did the fees go up? But then also when we compare life insurance company to life insurance company, you can have a company that has a greater dividend, but the internal rate of return might be higher on a different one. That's why for us, dividends are just this phantom number that I quite frankly don't even pay attention to. It's all about the internal rate of return because the internal rate of return is factoring in all the fees. And so while it doesn't spell out exactly the fee, you'll be able to compare your plan and really to see projections based on all those being factored in from day one. And because whole life insurance is built on guarantees and not necessarily phantom upside, it's more accurate than other illustrations that you can get. I'm sure that majority of people would agree that whole life, while it's not going to be accurate 30 years from now, it's going to be more accurate than what some other illustrations out there, especially with IUL, because there's more variables that could change based on now and in the future.
Okay, so dividend rate on whole life insurance is a lonely number because it's only one piece of the equation. you need to know the other pieces of the equation to know what your actual return is going to be. It's not going to be the stated dividend rate. Now, that's the technical way to describe dividends. And we could be more technical if we wanted to, but let me just make it a little bit more down to earth here. In your whole life insurance policy, every single year, the whole life insurance company is going to pay a rate that they determine for that year. That's it. It's almost like a fixed rate. So every single year, the whole life insurance company is going to pay you some fixed rate. That rate can go up from year to year. Most whole life insurance companies have always paid something, but they haven't always paid the same thing. So that's important. When you're looking at whole life insurance, you just need to know that those dividend rates go up and they go down. They're tied to interest rates. They're tied to company profitability. And so it does fluctuate from year to year. If we zoom out again and talk about how that compares to kind of our more favorite product, which would be the indexed life policy, if we're talking for maximum cash growth, the reason that for so long we have been harping on the indexed life policy is because the fixed rate that you see in the whole life insurance policy actually does apply to the indexed life policy. Every single year, the indexed life policy is going to offer you a fixed rate. And that rate may be somewhere between 4 and 6%, let's say, or 3 and 6%. But just like it fluctuates in whole life, it fluctuates in index life. Every single year, the company determines what their fixed rate is going to be for that year. And it can move up and it can move down. It'll move up and down based on interest rates and company profitability. And so we actually have the same crediting mechanism on index life that we have in whole life as an option. Now, most people will not choose the fixed rate in the indexed universal life insurance policy. And when you don't choose the fixed rate, the company says, well, I understand you don't want the fixed rate, but we've been holding cash just for you in order to be able to pay that fixed rate. So what do you want us to do with that cash that we've been holding for you? And in the index life policy, that cash that was going to be paid in the form of the fixed rate gets paid into options contracts, also known as a hedge. And so when you look at an index life policy, you see lots of line items or lots of underlying index options that you can decide, take my fixed rate money, don't pay it to me, instead invest it for me in the S&P hedge, invest it for me in the Barclays hedge, invest it for me in the NASDAQ hedge, or any other special index that the company might have. Why is that important? It's important because if you are willing to take a little bit more risk, and that's what you're doing here in this transaction, you're foregoing the sure thing, the fixed rate. It's guaranteed for that year. You know what it is. You're foregoing the guaranteed fixed rate for that year. And instead, you're choosing to invest that fixed rate into something else.
Underline invest.
That might pan out worse. If the S&P's down that year, you're not going to get a return. That's the 0% floor that we already talked about. But the S&P might perform better. And if it does, you capture that growth. And so what we've seen on indexed life policies is the options hedge, or foregoing the fixed rate for the opportunity to invest those dollars in some of the indexing options, the hedge, has resulted in a higher internal rate of return. And it should. And anybody who says otherwise is neglecting the fundamental relationship between risk and reward. The more risk you take, the more you should be rewarded.
I disagree with this. Your definition of risk is your chance of loss. So if you take that logic and say, I'm going to drive 300 miles an hour on the highway, great, I'm going to get to my destination faster. Yes, or you could end up dead. So I think this idea of risk, I get where he's saying, and I'm not going to disagree that if you properly fund an IUL policy versus properly fund a whole life over the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, will an IUL policy outperform? Maybe. We could debate this all day long. I'm not even sad, or I'm okay if it does quote unquote outperform, but I'm also saying it could massively underperform. But I would agree with you. You should not do an IUL if you're not banking on greater rate of return, because that's one of the core reasons why people are flocking to this, is for the potential upside. And so that's the only thing that I would say from a language standpoint. I'm on board with what he's saying. I just may talk about risk and reward a little bit different.
And that's what's happening here. And so if you want a maximum cash value policy and you're willing to take a little bit more risk than just simply collecting the declared fixed rate that can change from year to year based on interest rates, company profitability, if you're willing to take a little bit more risk, you can capture a little bit more reward.
I think so far he's been spot on in how he's talking about it. We can debate certain language, but I think he's done a very fair, balanced, approach to the whole life versus IUL.
And that's virtually how every single financial instrument, the more risk you take, the more you should be compensated with reward, assuming it's an efficient vehicle. And so the reason that we typically lean towards IUL is because we have the option. We could take the fixed rate if we wanted to, and that would perform similarly to the whole life insurance policy without all the additional fees, which should give us a little bit better cash growth. But we don't have to do that. If we want to take a little bit more risk, we can. And for that additional risk, we have seen and experienced higher rates of return. And so here's where we come to, maybe I was wrong all along. We've been pretty hard on whole life insurance because my assumption has been everybody should be willing to take a little bit more risk, because the risk that we're talking about here is not huge. Keep in mind, the company is fronting you the dollars for the investment in index life, right? It's not coming out of your cash account. The company is holding cash for you because you could choose the fixed rate every single year. If you don't choose the fixed rate, they have to do something on your behalf with that cash. So they invest it. They're fronting the investment for you. It was the money they were already going to pay you. So it's not much more risk. And because of that, I'm relatively young, and I think, man, who in their right mind would ever invest in whole life when you could take a little bit more risk for a much higher upside and get a product that's going to grow cash better in the form of an index life policy? And that's kind of been the tone of this channel for years. And maybe I need to rethink that. Let me tell you a story. So the way that we run our company here at Leveraged Wealth is I don't take big distributions until the end of the year. This is just how we do things with our taxes. I get a very small salary, and then at the end of the year, I get a big distribution. And so this year, I took my distribution from the company, I deposited it into the bank. I immediately started getting phone calls from my bank trying to get me to invest that money in a bank product, a CD, something like that. Now, I have a long-standing issue with my bank, and I typically don't answer their phone calls because they frustrate me. But I kept getting these phone calls, and so one day I decided, you know what, I'm going to pick up this phone call. Maybe something's wrong. Let's see what they have to say. And sure enough, it was a local bank rep who wanted to try to convince me to put my dollars into a CD at their bank. Now, they don't know who I am or what I do. They just know that, I deposited a big check into my account. Let's do something with that money. Let's just not have it sit there. So I listened to their sales pitch. And finally, at the end, I kind of let the person down easily. And I said, hey, thanks, but no thanks. This is what I do. I don't need your help. You guys can take me off your list. You don't need to call me. But the story continues because around this same time, I was having to wire funds for some purchases that I was making. So I was going into this bank often. And every time that I would go in there, there would be a couple sitting with one of the bankers. And almost every time I went in there, I heard mention of the performance of their bank CDs. And so all of a sudden, these two things come together. I'm getting phone calls trying to get me to invest my dollars in a bank CD. I'm going into the bank to wire some funds, and people are there talking about investing their dollars in these CD contracts. And I finally realized, man, I might have been wrong about whole life insurance all of this time, because a whole life insurance policy is so much better than putting your money in a bank CD.
Hey, listen up. I promise I'm going to land the plane, I think, in a really powerful way here.
the risk profile is really not much different. In fact, it might be better because the whole life insurance policy is at least giving you some guarantees. And since it's a contract, they're holding cash for you. I thought to myself, man, how many phone calls did I get to invest in this bank CD? 10, 20? So it must be working. If this bank is paying some employee to cold call people who have money in their accounts, it must be working. They must be getting people to invest in CDs. Because of that, it made me realize that maybe I've sold whole life insurance short all of these years. So let me just try to set the record straight. If you're somebody that would be inclined to invest in a bank product, I would strongly consider that you should look at whole life insurance before you decide to invest in that bank product, because you're going to probably get better guarantees. You're definitely going to get better growth on your dollars. You're going to get a tax-free death benefit. The growth is going to be tax-free, and it's going to be held by an institution that is probably one of the most financially strong and stable institutions in the world, a life insurance company, versus a bank who loans out all the dollars that they take on or deposit.
Yeah.
And so I don't want you to hear me say that whole life insurance is better than any other vehicle. But what I do want you to hear me say is, if you don't have the risk tolerance to be investing in something like stocks or bonds, if your risk tolerance is much lower than that, to the point where you're considering purchasing a bank CD product, I would tell you that it would really be worth your while to explore a whole life insurance policy instead and see what else is available. And if you do explore that product, I think you're going to come away pleasantly surprised. So that's me setting the record straight on whole life insurance. It's not the worst thing in the world. It is much better than some other products that are out there being sold to people who just don't have much of a tolerance for risk. And if that's you, you should consider whole life insurance. So maybe that's not the mea culpa that you were hoping for.
All right, you guys, so I'm gonna stop sharing now. What did you guys think?
I like the point on how the life insurance companies are required to hold the money. I know, Mario, you've expressed, I think it's like 75% of the money that's being deposited or being in premiums. And it's
dollar for dollar guarantee.
Oh, okay, so then it's a really good point to point out to clients that are so used to just a traditional bank and letting money sit in like a savings account, and just relaying that information that their money's not safe at a traditional bank. They have more safety in a life insurance company.
100%. Another thing I want to do real quick. So I'm assuming everybody has a pen and a paper. If you don't, whatever, try to do it on your phone or in your head, or if you have a calculator with you, good. If not, use your phone. So I want you to do this. I want you to break down the interest, and it's going to be a great point to explain to a client. A lot of the time, clients do not understand what the fees are. And I'm going to tell you why it's incredibly important to be able to break it down and explain. So of course, the guy was very, very on point when he said you have to reverse engineer an illustration or a policy that's already in place to understand the fees and the dividend interest and the interest in general that the client is going to receive and see every single year. So everybody here that has worked with me with whole life always knows that I always state that the interest for the policy is 11.5. Okay, so break this down. So write down a column and put down whole life interest 11.5%. Okay. Then write dividend interest 6.7, because that's what our illustrations say with Guardian. Index interest 4%. And whole life interest 1.6%. Does everybody have those numbers, or do you want me to repeat them again? Everybody has those.
The last one?
Okay.
The dividend, you said the dividend 6.7%.
6.7%. Put that on your piece of paper. I'm going to tell you and explain why. Okay, so whole life interest equals 11.5%, right? And then write dividend interest 6.7 then index interest 4%, and whole life interest 1.6%. Okay, all right.
And
So
index interest was what again? I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Index interest was what?
4%.
4%.
Correct.
And the last
So-
one, was what again?
The whole life
1.6.
interest, 1.6, correct. So next to that dividend interest, put minus 0.9% equals 5.9. Super important number, circle that 5.9. That's the main idea here, okay?
Could you repeat that? Okay.
Yeah, so next to the dividend interest that you have on your paper where it says 6.7%, put minus 0.9%. Okay. Cool. All right, so now take your calculator and subtract 0.9% from 6.7. And what do you get?
5.8, negative 5.8.
5.8, correct. So put 5.8 next to dividend interest. That's going to be your dividend interest that the company paid out every year. If you go to Google and Google Guardian Life Insurance or Whole Life Insurance dividend interest for the year 2023, the dividend interest was paid out at 5.8%. We always round up, always. In any securities and finance, you always round up. So 5.9%, okay? Does everybody understand this? So if you go to Google right now and Google that, that will be Guardian's dividend interest, okay? So if a client asks, what's the dividend interest? You say 5.9%. You can't say 5.7 because the illustration says that, it states that, because they don't show the fees. That guy was absolutely 100% correct on that. So I had to reverse engineer policy to figure out what the fees were, okay? So I did it. The true accurate interest is 5.9%. And if you look on Google, that's exactly what it is, okay? So 5.9%, okay, plus 4% on your calculator right now, plus 1.6 equals
11.5.
exactly, boom. There's your growth percentage. Because remember, whole life, especially specifically our product, is based on 3 things: dividend interest, index participation interest, and the whole life, the contract interest, okay? So that's how you come up with the 11.5%. And every time they overfund or they pay a premium, they get 11.5%. They don't just get dividend interest, because remember, if you overfund a policy, the life insurance portion is always growing. Why? Because that's the collateral, right? Everybody agrees with that and everybody understands that? Yes? Okay, so 11.5%. That's how we come up with it. Questions, comments, concerns, takeaways?
Thank
No.
you. I like that you've already excluded the fees from the number that we quote. So,
Yeah, because you can say 13% and what have you, and then at the end of the year, or when they get their statement, they see that the numbers don't add up. Well, in order for the numbers to be 100% accurate, you have to understand what the fees are, and you have to be able to reverse engineer a policy for them and explain it to them, because if not, you're going to lose that client real quick. So, takeaways, Sharina, talk to me. Well, I know you got here a little late, so.
No, so you just mentioned something and I wanted to get more clarity. You said every time they overfund the policy, they get 11.5%.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes. Every time
Okay,
you-
so like, sorry, the little one's right here. So every time you, okay, so let's say my client's paying the premium, he overfunds it, he gets like on another month. So he pays his premium and then the following month he overfunds it, he gets 11.5. Okay.
That's called interest. Yeah, and then remember this also, when people borrow from their cash value, borrow, not withdraw, when they borrow from their cash value, remember, they're gonna get charged an interest rate. So if you subtract 11.5% minus that interest rate that they have to pay, depending on the product, of course, typically it's 3.5% or 3%, what have you. So you're gonna subtract that 3% from the 11.5, and that percentage is what they're going to be paying themselves back. okay? So it's important that you explain that as well. So when they pay their loan back, they're gonna get, what's 11.5 minus 3.5%? I don't know, somebody do the math for me.
8.
It's like an 8%.
8%.
Mm.
Yes, you continue to make money every single time you borrow and every single time you pay your loan amount back. It doesn't have to be the full amount. Remember, it can be broken down in the years or months or whatever. But every time you pay money into that policy, you're paying yourself back at 8%. Okay. Make sense to everybody? That's why they build so much money. That's why this product is built and intended to borrow from. If you just want to keep it there, yes, it's still going to grow because every time you give a premium payment, obviously your dividend is going to grow, right? Your cash value is going to grow rather. But it's important that you emphasize to the client that this product works, A, when you overfund, and B, when you borrow and pay that money back. Why? Because now you're compounding interest. That's truly where the wealth comes from, okay? Make sense to everybody? Kind of. Does anybody have any questions? Let me see. Priscilla, do you have any questions, takeaways?
I need to go back. I have my freaking boss, the HR
Oh.
boss, not your boss.
No sweat, don't worry.
My boss is called,
No
not my
worries.
real good ones. So I need to go back and watch it because I want to see more of the difference. I know this has been a question I've had with you of like whole life versus IUL, everything. And then Mario, like about blew me away the other day. We're going to meet with one of my old clients on Monday about like the borrowing